Lost at night. It was supposed to be a fun road trip, just me and my friends, exploring the countryside and enjoying the scenic views. We had set out early in the morning, laughing and joking, with a cooler full of snacks and a GPS to guide us. As the day wore on, the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the rolling hills and fields. We stopped at a quaint little diner for dinner, fueling up on burgers and fries before getting back on the road. But as the night began to fall, our GPS led us further and further away from civilization. The roads became narrower and darker, the only sound being the crunch of gravel beneath our tires. "I don't like this," my friend Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. "We should turn back." But our friend Matt was insistent. "Come on, it's just a little farther," he said, his eyes fixed on the GPS screen. "We can't give up now." And so we continued on, the darkness closing in around us like a shroud. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches creaking ominously in the wind. Suddenly, the car sputtered and died. We were plunged into darkness, the only sound being the distant howling of wolves. "What's going on?" Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Matt tried to start the car, but it wouldn't budge. "We must have run out of gas," he said, his voice laced with panic. We were stranded, alone and vulnerable in the middle of nowhere. And as we sat there, frozen with fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. As we sat there, the darkness seemed to press in around us, making it hard to breathe. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. "We have to get out of here," Emily said, her voice shaking. "We can't just sit here." Matt nodded, and we slowly got out of the car, our eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The wind rustled through the trees, making it sound like someone was whispering our names. We started to walk, trying to find a way back to civilization. But the darkness seemed to shift and twist around us, making it impossible to get our bearings. As we walked, the silence began to feel oppressive, like a weight was crushing us. I tried to make small talk, but my voice sounded hollow and forced. Suddenly, Emily grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "What's that?" she whispered, pointing to a light in the distance. We stopped, our hearts pounding, as the light grew brighter. It was a house, nestled among the trees, its windows glowing with a warm, golden light. But as we approached, I realized that something was off. The house seemed wrong. The windows were too large, the door too small. And the light, it seemed to pulse with a strange, otherworldly energy. "Do you guys feel that?" Matt whispered, his voice trembling. "It's like something's watching us." I nodded, my heart racing. We were being watched, I was sure of it. And whatever was watching us, it didn't want us to leave. As we stood there, frozen with fear, the front door of the house creaked open by itself. The light spilled out, bathing us in an eerie glow. "Welcome," a low, raspy voice called out. "Come in." I exchanged a terrified glance with my friends. Who, or what, was inviting us in? But our legs seemed to move of their own accord, carrying us towards the house as if drawn by an unseen force. We stepped inside, our hearts pounding in our chests. The interior of the house was just as strange as the exterior. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, etched into the wood in a language I couldn't understand. The air was thick with the scent of decay and rot. A figure emerged from the shadows, its face twisted into a grotesque grin. "I've been waiting for you," it said, its voice dripping with malice. As we watched in horror, the figure began to change, its body contorting and twisting until it was no longer human. It was something else, something ancient and evil. "You should not have come here," it hissed, its eyes blazing with malevolence. "Now you'll never leave." And with that, the creature lunged at us, its jaws open wide. We tried to run, but our feet were rooted to the spot. As the creature's teeth closed in around us, I realized that we were doomed. We had stumbled into a nightmare from which we might never awaken. Everything went black as the creature's teeth sank into my flesh. I felt a searing pain, and my vision began to blur. But then, something strange happened. The pain began to recede, and my vision cleared. I found myself standing in a vast, empty space, surrounded by an eerie, pulsing light. Emily and Matt were nowhere to be seen. I called out their names, but there was no response. Suddenly, a figure appeared before me. It was the creature, but it had changed again. Its body was now humanoid, with skin like decaying flesh. "You should not have come here," it repeated, its voice dripping with malice. "But since you did, you'll have to play my game." The creature gestured to a door behind it. "Solve my puzzle, and you'll be free to go. But if you fail..." It didn't need to finish the sentence. I knew that if I failed, I'd be trapped forever in this nightmare world. I steeled myself and nodded. "I'll play your game." The creature smiled, its lips curling up in a grotesque grin. "Excellent. Let's begin." And with that, it pushed me through the door, into a world of unspeakable horrors. I found myself in a maze of twisting corridors, with walls made of cold, gray stone. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could hear the distant sound of screams. The creature appeared beside me, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. "Solve my puzzle, and you'll find your way out," it repeated. I looked around, trying to take in every detail. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, etched into the stone in a language I couldn't understand. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. "Look for the pattern," it said. I spun around, trying to see who was speaking to me, but there was no one there. I looked back at the symbols on the wall, and suddenly, I saw it. A pattern, hidden in the intricate carvings. I followed the pattern, my heart pounding in my chest. It led me through the twisting corridors, deeper and deeper into the maze. And then, I saw it. A door, with a symbol etched into it. The same symbol that was at the center of the pattern. I pushed open the door, and found myself back in the forest. The moon was high overhead, casting an eerie glow over the trees. But something was wrong. The trees seemed to be twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And then, I heard the creature's voice behind me. "You may have solved my puzzle," it said, "but you'll never escape the forest." I turned to face it, but it was too late. The creature's claws sank into my back, and everything went black. The end. Endless night. It started with a sense of unease, a feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but as the sun began to set, I felt a growing sense of dread. At first, I tried to brush it off as mere paranoia. But as the hours ticked by, the darkness outside seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. It was as if the very fabric of night itself was closing in around me. I tried to distract myself with TV, but the shows seemed hollow, uninteresting. I switched to music, but the melodies seemed discordant, jarring. Even the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the creaks and groans of the old house. And then, I started to notice something strange. The clock on the wall seemed to be slowing down, the hands ticking by with agonizing slowness. I checked my phone, but the time seemed to be stuck, frozen at 11:47 p.m. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized that time itself seemed to be warped, distorted. The night seemed to be stretching out, endless and unrelenting. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The night seemed to be watching me, waiting for me to make a wrong move. And then, I heard the first knock. The knock was soft, almost tentative. It came from the front door, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should answer it. But something compelled me to get up and make my way to the door. I peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. The porch was empty, the swing creaking gently in the breeze. I opened the door, calling out into the night, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no response. The only sound was the distant hum of crickets and the creaking of the old house. I stepped out onto the porch, feeling the cool night air on my skin. The darkness seemed to press in around me, making me feel claustrophobic. And then, I saw it. A figure, standing at the edge of the yard. It was tall and imposing, its presence seeming to fill the entire space. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching me. I tried to call out, but my voice was caught in my throat. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure began to move closer, its presence seeming to grow more menacing with each step. I was trapped, unable to escape. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the porch, my head throbbing with pain. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but I could sense its presence still, watching me from the shadows. I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing with fear. I had to get out of there, had to escape from the endless night. I staggered back into the house, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, bolted it, and leaned against it to catch my breath. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was off. The furniture seemed to be shifted, the shadows cast in strange and ominous ways. And then, I saw it. A message, scrawled on the wall in blood-red letters. "I'll always be watching." I spun around, but there was no one there. The message seemed to be staring at me, mocking me. I knew then that I had to get out of there, had to escape from the house and the endless night. I grabbed my keys and made a run for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I spun around, trying to shake off the hand, but it only gripped me tighter. I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled by some unseen force. The hand spun me around, and I faced a figure shrouded in darkness. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, piercing through the shadows. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it pulled me closer, its grip like ice. I felt myself being drawn into its darkness, consumed by an eternal night. Suddenly, the room began to distort, like a reflection in rippling water. The furniture melted away, replaced by an endless expanse of blackness. I was trapped in a living nightmare, with no escape. The figure's grip tightened, pulling me deeper into the abyss. And then, I saw it. A glimmer of light, far in the distance. It was a way out, a chance to escape the endless night. With newfound strength, I struggled against the figure's grip. It didn't budge, but I managed to inch closer to the light. I stretched out my hand, straining towards the light. It was so close, yet so far. The figure's grip tightened, trying to pull me back. But I refused to give up. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched myself free from the figure's grasp. I stumbled towards the light, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the light, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being pulled apart and put back together again. The world around me dissolved into chaos, colors bleeding into each other like watercolors in the rain. And then, suddenly, I was back in my own bed, gasping for breath. It was morning, the sunlight streaming through the window like a warm hug. I lay there, trying to process what had just happened. Was it a dream? A nightmare? Or something more? As I looked around the room, I noticed something strange. On the wall, in letters that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, was a message: "The night is never ending." I knew then that I had to get out of there, to escape the endless night that seemed to be haunting me. I packed my bags and fled, leaving behind the house and the darkness that lurked within. But as I looked back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The house was shrouded in shadows, the windows like empty eyes staring back at me, and I knew that I would never be able to escape the endless night. The end. Creepy nights. The small town of Ravenswood was never the same after the night the children disappeared. It was a typical summer evening, with the sun setting over the horizon and the crickets chirping in the fields. But as the night wore on, a sense of unease settled over the town. Parents began to notice that their children were missing, and a search party was quickly formed. I was part of that search party, and I'll never forget the feeling of dread that settled in the pit of my stomach as we combed through the woods, calling out the names of the missing children. As the night wore on, the search party grew more and more desperate. We knew that we had to find the children before it was too late. But as we searched, we began to realize that something was off. The woods seemed to be shifting and twisting around us, making it impossible to keep our bearings. And then, we stumbled upon an old, abandoned house deep in the woods. The windows were boarded up, and the door was covered in cobwebs. But as we approached the house, we heard a strange noise. It sounded like children laughing, but it was a cold, mirthless sound. As we listened to the sound of the children's laughter, a chill ran down my spine. It was a sound that was both familiar and yet utterly alien. We cautiously approached the house, our flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. The laughter grew louder, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The silence was oppressive, and I felt like I was holding my breath. We entered the house, our eyes scanning the dark and dusty interior. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel a malevolent presence lurking just out of sight. As we moved deeper into the house, I stumbled upon a room that seemed frozen in time. The walls were adorned with children's drawings, and there was a small table in the center of the room, surrounded by tiny chairs. But what caught my attention was the collection of photographs on the wall. They were pictures of the missing children, and they seemed to be staring straight into my soul. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I spun around to see one of the search party members, his eyes wide with fear. "What's wrong?" I whispered. "I saw something," he replied, his voice trembling. "A figure, lurking in the shadows." As we stood there, frozen in fear, the figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. The figure began to move towards us, its presence seeming to fill the entire room. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The figure reached out a bony hand and touched my face. I felt a surge of ice-cold fear, and my vision began to blur. As I stumbled backwards, I saw the figure begin to change. Its body began to stretch and contort, its limbs elongating like rubber. I stumbled out of the room, desperate to escape the horror that I had witnessed. But as I ran, I realized that I was lost in the house. The corridors seemed to shift and twist around me, leading me deeper into the heart of the house. I stumbled upon room after room, each one filled with unspeakable horrors. And then, I heard the sound of children laughing again. But this time, it was different. The laughter was louder, more menacing. I knew then that I had to find a way out of the house. But as I turned to run, I realized that I was not alone. As I turned to run, I saw the missing children standing behind me. Their eyes were black as coal, and their skin was deathly pale. They began to move towards me, their movements stiff and jerky. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The children surrounded me, their cold eyes staring into mine. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, as if I was being pulled down into a dark and endless abyss. And then, the children began to speak. Their voices were low and raspy, and they seemed to be speaking in unison. "You should not have come here," they said. "Now you'll never leave." As they spoke, the children began to change. Their bodies began to stretch and contort, their limbs elongating like rubber. I tried to run, but it was too late. The children closed in around me, their cold eyes staring into mine. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a dark and damp cellar. The air was thick with the scent of mold and decay. As I struggled to sit up, I realized that I was not alone. The missing children were standing around me, their eyes still black as coal. But something was different. They seemed changed. Their bodies seemed to be twisted and distorted, as if they had been melted and reformed. And then, I saw it. A figure standing behind the children, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The figure began to move towards me, its presence seeming to fill the entire room. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. As the figure loomed over me, I realized that I was staring into the face of pure evil. The figure was ancient, its eyes burning with a malevolent intensity. And then, everything went black again. When I came to, I was lying in my own bed, the morning sunlight streaming through the window. It was all just a dream, I told myself. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was off. The window was open, and the curtains were blowing in the wind. And on the wall, in letters that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, was a message: "I'll always be watching." I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just a dream. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was off. The furniture seemed to be slightly rearranged, and the air was thick with an eerie, unsettling energy. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And then, I heard the sound of footsteps outside my room. They were light, cautious steps, as if someone was trying not to be heard. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I could sense a presence lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was one of the missing children, its eyes still black as coal. The child began to move towards me, its movements stiff and jerky. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. And then, everything went black again. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. What happened? I asked, my voice shaking. You were found unconscious in your bedroom, one of the doctors replied. You've been asleep for days. I tried to sit up, but a wave of pain washed over me. What about the children? I asked. The doctor's expression turned grim. We found none of the missing children, he said. But we did find something strange. He paused, hesitating. What is it? I asked. We found a message, scrawled on the wall of your bedroom, he said. It said, I'm still watching. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just a dream. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was off. The furniture seemed to be slightly rearranged, and the air was thick with an eerie, unsettling energy. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And then, I heard the sound of footsteps outside my room. They were light, cautious steps, as if someone was trying not to be heard. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps stopped outside my door, and I could sense a presence lurking just out of sight. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and a figure slipped inside. It was one of the missing children, its eyes still black as coal. The child began to move towards me, its movements stiff and jerky. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. And then, everything went black again. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by doctors and nurses. What happened? I asked, my voice shaking. You were found unconscious in your bedroom, one of the doctors replied. You've been asleep for days. I tried to sit up, but a wave of pain washed over me. What about the children? I asked. The doctor's expression turned grim. We found none of the missing children, he said. But we did find something strange. He paused, hesitating. What is it? I asked. We found a message, scrawled on the wall of your bedroom, he said. It said, I'm still watching. I felt a chill run down my spine as I heard the doctor's words. I'm still watching. It was the same message I had seen on my wall, the same message that had been haunting me. I knew then that I had to get out of there, to escape the hospital and the creepy feeling that was suffocating me. I threw off the covers and swung my legs over the side of the bed. The doctor and nurses tried to stop me, but I was determined. As I stumbled out of the hospital room, I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It was the same child I had seen before, its eyes still black as coal. I tried to run, but my legs were weak. The child began to move towards me, its movements stiff and jerky. And then, everything went black again. When I came to, I was lying in a strange room. It was dark and damp, and I could hear the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls. I struggled to sit up, but my head was spinning. As I looked around, I saw that I was in some kind of cellar. And then, I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the room, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Welcome home, it said, its voice low and menacing. I knew then that I was trapped in a living nightmare from which I might never awaken. As I looked around the cellar, I realized that I was completely alone. The figure had vanished, leaving me to my own devices. I stumbled to my feet, my head still spinning. I had to get out of there, had to find a way back to the surface. As I looked around, I saw a set of stairs leading up to a door. I stumbled towards them, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top of the stairs, I pushed open the door and found myself back in my own bedroom. But something was off. The room was different, somehow. The furniture was the same, but it was all slightly rearranged. And the window was open. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I had been here before. This was the room where it had all started, the room where I had first seen the figure. And then, I heard the voice. You'll never escape. I spun around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing off the walls. I knew then that I was trapped in a never-ending cycle of terror, and I knew that I would never be able to escape. As the darkness closed in around me, I screamed, "The end!" The haunted mansion. As I stepped out of the car and onto the crumbling driveway, a shiver ran down my spine. The mansion loomed before me, its towering spires and turrets reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. My name is Emily, and I'd inherited this monstrosity from a distant relative I'd never met. The lawyer's letter had been cryptic, but the promise of a vast inheritance had been too enticing to resist. As I approached the mansion, I noticed something odd. The windows were all boarded up, and the front door was covered in cobwebs. It looked as though no one had lived here for decades. I pushed open the creaking front door and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. I coughed, covering my mouth with my sleeve. As I looked around, I saw that the interior was just as neglected as the exterior. Furniture was shrouded in dust sheets, and the walls were adorned with faded portraits. But it was the staircase that caught my attention. It curved upwards like a ghostly ribbon, vanishing into the darkness above. I felt a sudden chill run down my spine. Something was watching me. As I stood there, frozen in fear, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. It was a soft, raspy voice, and it seemed to be coming from all around me. "Welcome home, Emily," the voice whispered. I spun around, trying to see who was speaking, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. "Get out while you still can." I knew then that I had to explore the mansion, to uncover its secrets. I took a deep breath and began to climb the stairs. The whispering grew fainter as I ascended, but I could feel eyes upon me, watching me. I reached the top of the stairs and saw a long, dark corridor stretching out before me. I fumbled in my pocket for a flashlight and turned it on. The beam of light illuminated the corridor, revealing cobweb-shrouded portraits and dusty candelabras. As I walked down the corridor, I noticed that the doors to the rooms were all slightly ajar. I pushed open the first door and saw a bedroom, the bed covered in a thick layer of dust. But it was the next room that made my blood run cold. It was a nursery, filled with antique toys and a beautiful, ornate crib. And on the wall, in letters scrawled in red crayon, "They're waiting for you." As I stood there, frozen in fear, I heard a faint creaking sound. It was soft at first, but grew louder and more insistent. I turned to face the staircase, my heart pounding in my chest. The creaking grew louder still, and I could feel the vibrations of footsteps through the floorboards. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness above. It was a woman, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. She began to descend the stairs, her movements slow and deliberate. I tried to step back, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she stopped and regarded me with a cold, calculating gaze. "Welcome to Ravenswood Manor," she said, her voice low and husky. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. The woman's eyes seemed to be hypnotizing me, drawing me in with an otherworldly power. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on a dusty old bed, my head throbbing with pain. The woman was nowhere to be seen, but I could sense her presence still, watching me from the shadows. I knew then that I had to get out of Ravenswood Manor, to escape the clutches of the mysterious woman and the dark forces that lurked within these walls. But as I stumbled out of the bedroom, I realized that I was lost in a labyrinth of corridors and chambers. The mansion seemed to stretch on forever, its secrets and terrors waiting to be uncovered. As I wandered through the mansion, I stumbled upon a door that seemed out of place. It was hidden behind a tattered tapestry, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. I pushed the door open, and a musty smell wafted out. Inside, I found a room filled with ancient artifacts and dusty old books. But what caught my attention was a large, leather-bound diary. It was locked, but I managed to pick the lock after a few minutes of fiddling with it. As I opened the diary, I saw that it belonged to Malcolm Ravenswood, the former owner of the mansion. The entries were cryptic, but they seemed to hint at a dark family secret. I read on, my heart racing with anticipation. The entries grew more and more disturbing, until I finally stumbled upon the truth. Malcolm Ravenswood had made a pact with a malevolent entity, trading his family's souls for wealth and power. The entity had demanded a terrible price, and the Ravenswood family had been cursed ever since. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was trapped in the mansion, surrounded by the vengeful spirits of the Ravenswood family. And then, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. "You shouldn't have come here." I spun around, trying to see who was whispering in my ear, but there was no one there. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. I felt a presence closing in around me, suffocating me. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. I was plunged into darkness, surrounded by the oppressive silence of the mansion. I stumbled forward, desperate to find a way out, but every door I opened led only to more corridors, more rooms. I was trapped. And then, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a candle, flickering in the darkness. I stumbled towards it, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the candle, I saw that it was sitting on a small, ornate table. And on the table, there was a note. It was addressed to me. "Dear Emily," it read. "I've been waiting for you. You'll never leave this place." I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was trapped in the mansion, at the mercy of the malevolent entity that haunted it. And then, I heard footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps, coming from the floor above. The footsteps grew louder, heavier, and I could feel the vibrations of each step through the floorboards. I knew that I had to get out of there, but my legs felt like lead. Suddenly, the candle on the table flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. I was trapped, alone and defenseless in the haunted mansion. And then, I saw a faint light in the distance. It was a figure, standing at the top of the stairs. The figure began to move towards me, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable horror. As the figure drew closer, I saw that it was Malcolm Ravenswood, the former owner of the mansion. His eyes were black as coal, and his skin was deathly pale. "Welcome to my home," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You'll never leave." I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. Malcolm reached out a bony hand and grasped my wrist, pulling me towards him. As I stumbled forward, I saw that we were standing in front of a large, ornate mirror. Malcolm's eyes seemed to be burning with an otherworldly intensity as he pulled me closer to the mirror. And then, I saw my own reflection staring back at me, but it was distorted, twisted into a grotesque parody of my own face. Malcolm's grip tightened on my wrist, and I felt a searing pain as he pulled me into the mirror. As I was pulled into the mirror, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being sucked into a vortex. The world around me began to distort and blur, and I felt myself being stretched and compressed. When I finally emerged on the other side, I found myself in a strange, surreal world. The sky was a deep, bloody red, and the trees were twisted and gnarled. Malcolm Ravenswood was standing beside me, his eyes still burning with an otherworldly intensity. "Welcome to my world," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You'll never escape." As we walked through the twisted landscape, I saw all manner of horrors. Grotesque creatures lurched through the shadows, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. I knew then that I was trapped in a living nightmare, and that Malcolm Ravenswood was my guide and tormentor. But I refused to give up. I knew that I had to find a way out of this twisted world, no matter what horrors lay ahead. And then, I saw it. A glimmer of light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. "Malcolm," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I'm not going to play your game. I'm going to escape." Malcolm's eyes flashed with anger, and he reached out to grab me. But I was too quick. I dodged his grasp and made a run for the light. As I emerged from the twisted landscape, I found myself back in the mansion. But something was different. The walls seemed to be shifting and twisting, and the air was thick with an eerie, pulsating energy. As I stumbled through the mansion, I realized that I was completely disoriented. The rooms seemed to be shifting and changing around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being herded towards some unknown fate. I stumbled upon a door that I was certain hadn't been there before. It was old and worn, with heavy iron hinges and a large, rusty doorknob. I turned the doorknob and pushed the door open, revealing a narrow stairway that descended deep into the earth. The air that wafted up from the depths was cold and damp, and I could hear the sound of dripping water echoing up the stairs. I knew that I had to be careful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn towards something. I began to make my way down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I descended deeper into the earth, the air grew colder and the darkness seemed to press in around me. I stumbled and almost fell, but managed to catch myself just in time. Finally, I reached the bottom of the stairs and found myself in a small, damp chamber. The walls were made of cold, gray stone, and the air was heavy with the scent of mold and decay. And then, I saw it. A large, ornate box sat in the center of the room, adorned with strange symbols and markings. The box seemed to be pulsing with a malevolent energy, and I knew that I had to be careful. Suddenly, I heard a faint whispering in my ear. "Open the box," it said. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. The whispering in my ear grew louder, more insistent. "Open the box," it repeated. I knew that I shouldn't give in to the voice, but a part of me was curious. What could be inside the box? I reached out a trembling hand and touched the lid. It was cold to the touch, and seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. As I lifted the lid, a musty smell wafted out. I peered inside, and saw that the box was filled with a dark, misty substance. The whispering in my ear grew louder still, urging me to reach inside the box. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but my curiosity got the better of me. I reached inside the box, and felt a chill run down my spine. As I touched the misty substance, I felt a sudden jolt of electricity. The room around me began to spin, and I felt myself being pulled towards the box. I tried to pull my hand back, but it was too late. The misty substance seemed to be pulling me in, drawing me into the box. I felt myself being sucked into a vortex, a swirling tunnel of darkness. I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled and distant. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I found myself back in the foyer of the mansion. But something was different. The room seemed to be distorted, as if it was reflected in a funhouse mirror. I stumbled forward, trying to get my bearings, but every step I took seemed to lead me in circles. I was trapped in a never-ending loop, reliving the same moments over and over. And then, I saw her. The woman in black, standing at the top of the stairs. She beckoned to me, her eyes gleaming with a malevolent light. I tried to run, but my legs were heavy, unresponsive. I was trapped, unable to move or escape. The woman began to descend the stairs, her eyes fixed on me. I could feel her presence, cold and malignant, spreading through the room like a stain. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she spoke in a voice that was like a rusty gate. "You should not have come here," she said. And with that, the room went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. The mansion was silent, the only sound the creaking of the old wooden beams. I stumbled to my feet, determined to escape. But as I reached the front door, I found that it was locked. The key was gone. I was trapped. And then, I heard the whispering. A soft, raspy voice that seemed to be coming from all around me. "You'll never leave," it said. I spun around, trying to locate the source of the whispering, but there was no one in sight. The whispering grew louder, more urgent. "You'll never leave," it repeated. I knew then that I had to find a way out of the mansion, no matter what. I began to search the rooms, looking for a door or a window that I could use to escape. But every door I opened led only to more rooms, more corridors. I was trapped in a maze, with no way out. And then, I saw it. A small, hidden door that blended seamlessly into the wall. I hadn't noticed it before. I pushed the door open, and a musty smell wafted out. I stepped through the doorway, and found myself in a narrow, dimly lit corridor. The corridor stretched out before me, disappearing into the darkness. I knew that I had to follow it, no matter where it led. As I walked, the corridor began to slope downward, leading me deeper into the earth. I could feel the weight of the mansion above me, pressing down on my shoulders. And then, I heard the sound of dripping water. It was a faint, echoing sound, but it seemed to be getting louder. I rounded a corner, and saw a faint light in the distance. It was a small, flickering flame, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I approached the flame, I saw that it was coming from a small, ornate lantern. The lantern was sitting on a pedestal, surrounded by a halo of light. And then, I saw the words. They were etched into the wall, in letters that seemed to be made of blood. "Welcome to your grave," they read. I stumbled backward, shocked and confused. The figure standing in front of me was identical to me, with the same face, the same hair, the same clothes. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. Malcolm Ravenswood stepped forward, a sly smile spreading across his face. "You're trapped in a loop," he said. "A never-ending cycle of fear and terror." I looked around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening. But everything seemed distorted, twisted. The figure in front of me began to speak, its voice identical to mine. "You'll never escape," it said. "You'll be trapped here forever." I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled and distant. The room began to spin around me, and I felt myself being pulled towards the figure. As I got closer, I saw that its eyes were black as coal, and its skin was deathly pale. I was staring into the face of my own terror. When I came to, I was lying on the porch, my head throbbing with pain. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but I could sense its presence still, watching me from the shadows. I stumbled to my feet, my heart racing with fear. I had to get out of there, had to escape from the endless night. I staggered back into the house, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it, bolted it, and leaned against it to catch my breath. But as I looked around the room, I realized that something was off. The furniture seemed to be shifted, the shadows cast in strange and ominous ways. And then, I saw it. A message, scrawled on the wall in blood-red letters. "I'll always be watching." I spun around, but there was no one there. The message seemed to be staring at me, mocking me. I knew then that I had to get out of there, had to escape from the house and the endless night. I grabbed my keys and made a run for the door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a cold, clammy hand on my shoulder. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, but it only seemed to intensify. I could feel eyes upon me, boring into my skin. I knew then that I had to escape, no matter what. I began to search the room more frantically, looking for any possible means of escape. As I searched, I stumbled upon a small, hidden compartment in the wall. Inside, I found a key. I grabbed the key and rushed to the door, unlocking it with shaking hands. As I pulled the door open, I felt a rush of cool air, and I saw a sliver of light in the distance. I knew then that I was close to freedom. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the unknown. As I emerged from the room, I found myself in a long, dark corridor. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, and I could feel the weight of the mansion bearing down upon me. But I didn't let that stop me. I began to run, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I could feel the key clutched in my hand, and I knew that I was one step closer to freedom. As I ran, the corridor seemed to grow longer and darker. I could feel the shadows closing in around me, and I knew that I was not alone. And then, I saw it. A figure, standing in the distance, watching me. As I ran towards the figure, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I was terrified, but I knew I had to keep moving. As I got closer, I saw that it was Malcolm Ravenswood. He was standing in front of a large, wooden door, and he was smiling at me. "Welcome," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I've been waiting for you." I tried to run past him, but he was too quick. He grabbed me, holding me in a tight grip. "You'll never leave this place," he hissed, his breath cold against my ear. I struggled and kicked, but he was too strong. He dragged me back into the depths of the mansion, deeper into the darkness. As we walked, the walls seemed to close in around me. I could feel the weight of the mansion bearing down upon me, crushing me. And then, I saw it. A door, hidden behind a tapestry. Malcolm pushed me through the door, and I found myself back in the foyer. But something was different. The room was changed, twisted. The walls were distorted, and the furniture was rearranged. I stumbled forward, confused and disoriented. And then, I saw it. A figure, standing in the center of the room. It was me. I stumbled backward, shocked and confused. The figure standing in front of me was identical to me, with the same face, the same hair, the same clothes. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. Malcolm Ravenswood stepped forward, a sly smile spreading across his face. "You're trapped in a loop," he said. "A never-ending cycle of fear and terror." I looked around the room, trying to make sense of what was happening, but everything seemed distorted, twisted. The figure in front of me began to speak, its voice identical to mine. "You'll never escape," it said. "You'll be trapped here forever." I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled and distant. The room began to spin around me, and I felt myself being pulled towards the figure. As I got closer, I saw that its eyes were black as coal, and its skin was deathly pale. I was staring into the face of my own terror. I was consumed by a sense of dread as I stared into the face of my doppelganger. Its eyes seemed to bore into my soul, and I could feel its icy breath on my skin. Suddenly, the room was filled with a blinding flash of light. I stumbled backward, shielding my eyes. When the light faded, I saw that the doppelganger was gone, but Malcolm Ravenswood was still standing in front of me, his eyes gleaming with malevolence. "You'll never escape," he repeated, his voice dripping with malice. I knew then that I had to think fast. I remembered the key that I had found earlier, and I realized that it might be the only way to escape. I reached into my pocket and grasped the key tightly. I knew that I had to find the right door to unlock. Malcolm Ravenswood began to laugh, a cold, mirthless sound. "You'll never find the right door," he sneered. But I was determined. I began to search the room, looking for any door that might lead to freedom. As I searched, I stumbled upon a small, hidden door. It was locked, but I knew that I had the key. I inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a set of stairs that led up to the sunlight. I took a deep breath and began to climb the stairs. I knew that I was taking a risk, but I had to try. As I emerged into the sunlight, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never felt before. I knew that I had escaped the haunted mansion, and that I would never go back. But as I looked back at the mansion, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Malcolm Ravenswood was standing in the window, his eyes fixed on me with a malevolent glare. I knew then that I would never be free from the haunted mansion. The end.